So, when the Romans packed up and left Britain in the early 5th century, they didn't exactly leave behind a farewell note. One day there were Roman roads, aqueducts, soldiers patrolling Hadrian's Wall, and trade ships arriving at ports. The next, silence. What followed was centuries later called the Dark Ages, a dramatic name, yes, but not entirely undeserved. Towns fell into decay, roads crumbled, and villas once symbols of Roman luxury were abandoned or turned into farmhouses. For ordinary people, survival meant going back to basics. Forget Roman baths or imported olive oil. A typical day was filled with hard labor, herding sheep, digging fields, and repairing huts. Coins disappeared from circulation, so barter was back in style. Want wool? Trade some grain? Need iron tools? Better hope you've got a cow to swap. But life wasn't just mud and misery. Communities were tight-knit, families lived together in wooden halls, and storytelling became the main entertainment. Imagine a world without Google, without electricity, without indoor plumbing. Instead of binge-watching the latest series, you spend your evenings listening to bards recounting tales of heroism, battles, and faraway lands. No social media, so you actually talk to people face-to-face. Sound kind of refreshing? Well, that's what life was like in post-Roman Britain, but don't be fooled. This wasn't a carefree existence. It was a constant struggle to survive. The Roman Empire had brought stability and prosperity to Britain, but with Rome's departure, that stability vanished. In its place, petty kings ruled small territories, often waging war on each other. These weren't your typical medieval kings, mind you. They weren't crowned in great cathedrals or anointed with holy oil. These guys were warriors first, administrators second. Power was measured in how many swords you could gather, not how well you could govern. And there were a lot of swords to gather. Without a central authority, Britain descended into a kind of anarchic feudalism. Imagine a patchwork quilt made of tiny kingdoms, each one fiercely independent, constantly jostling for power. In this chaotic setting, daily life was anything but peaceful. Villagers lived in fear of marauders, so they fortified their homes with wooden walls and sharpened their own weapons just in case. It was a far cry from the relative security of Roman times, when common folk could travel the Empire's roads pretty much unmolested. But as always, where there's smoke, there's fire. While historians debate how accurate these accounts are, they give us a glimpse into a world turned upside down. Gone were the days when merchants sailed freely between Britain and Gaul, or silver coins were minted in provincial mints. In their place were tales of violence, uncertainty, and a struggle for dominance. But amid this turmoil, seeds of new cultures were sown. As the Anglo-Saxons, Scots, and other Germanic tribes carved out their domains in Britain, they brought with them new ways of life. Their languages took root, their customs blended with the existing Celtic traditions, and their values shaped the very fabric of society. Literature played a pivotal role in preserving and transmitting this cultural heritage. Works like Beowulf, The Battle of Maldon, and The Song of Roland are not just epic poems. They're historical touchstones. They capture the essence of a society in transition, grappling with change while forging ahead. But let's be real, it wasn't all mead halls and epic poetry. Life during this period was tough. Famine, disease, and war were constant companions, and the gap between the haves and have-nots yawned ever wider. The demise of the Roman Empire didn't bring about an instant collapse of British society. It was more like a slow-motion train wreck, a gradual decline that gave way to centuries of struggle and transformation. As we peer into this turbulent past, we find echoes of a world both familiar and alien. We see the remnants of Roman influence, the seeds of new cultures taking root, and the enduring spirit of humanity in the face of adversity. The fall of Rome wasn't just an ending, it was a beginning. A beginning filled with challenges, yes, but also brimming with potential. You thought leaving Rome would bring peace? Think again. Because while the legions packing up and heading home might have seemed like a good idea at the time, it didn't take long for newcomers across the sea to set their sights on Britain. We're talking Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, all eager to make their dreams come true, by which I mean plundering and pillaging the island's riches. And when I say they arrived, politely, you can picture the scene. Swords out, axes at the ready, pillaging and plundering, burning coastal towns and sending the locals packing. Back to the Dark Ages we go. But wait, before you grab your torch and pitchfork, let me explain. Sure, these Germanic tribes had a taste for land grabbing, but they also brought about significant changes that laid the groundwork for what we today call England. So let's dive in. Let's start with the not-so-grand entrance of our favorite land grabbers. These Germanic tribes, the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, they weren't exactly invited. No, they just showed up in the 5th century AD with dreams of land and power, and they didn't waste any time making their presence felt. Villages were raided, people were killed or enslaved, and the survivors, well, they were pushed further and further west, seeking refuge in Wales and Cornwall. Now here's where things get interesting. Despite all the swordplay and bloodshed, these newcomers gradually established their own kingdoms, namely Kent, Wessex, Mercia, and Northumbria. It wasn't quite the England we know today, more like a bunch of squabbling kingdoms with shifting alliances and a whole lot of fighting, but hey, at least they were organized. Kind of. Life in a Saxon village wasn't all mead halls and merriment, that's for sure. Houses were humble wooden huts with thatched roofs and smoky fires, no chimneys, just imagine the smell. Food was a bit of a gamble, too. One minute it was barley porridge, bread, and salted meat, nothing fancy, mind you. The next, it was a meager bowl of thin gruel. But every now and then there'd be a feast, ale flowing, roasted pork sizzling, but those were the good times. More often than not, it was a struggle to put food on the table. Yet amidst this struggle, something new was taking root. The Saxons, you see, they cleared forests, farmed new lands, and built halls where communities gathered, traded, and celebrated. Over time, they even adapted some Roman ways like building paved roads and setting up local governments. And their pagan gods, Woden, Thor, and the rest, they became part of the everyday. Festivals, sacrifices, and feasts were held in their honor, giving people a sense of meaning and continuity in a world that was rapidly changing. In the midst of all this change, Christianity started taking hold too, not by the sword, but through the efforts of missionaries like St. Augustine, who arrived in 596 AD with a simple message. Now, it's not like the Saxons were quick to convert, but that's a story for another time. So, yeah, the departure of the Romans might have left Britain feeling a bit vulnerable, but it also created space for new cultures, new ideas, and yes, new kingdoms to rise. The Saxons, despite their love for pillaging, also brought about significant changes that helped shape England's early history. They were rough around the edges, sure, but they were also innovators, builders, and, in their own way, they helped lay the foundation for what was to come. As we continue our journey through time, remember, it's not just about the big empires and famous faces. It's also about the ordinary people, their daily lives, and how their choices, big and small, shape our world. Because history, my friends, is not just about dates and battles. It's about the stories we tell ourselves about the past. It's about understanding where we came from so we can navigate where we're going. So join me on this adventure through time and let's explore together. Who knows what fascinating tales and intriguing characters we might uncover next. Keep watching and let the journey begin. We're used to thinking of the Dark Ages as a time when Europe was overrun by Christians, but that's not how the story started. When Germanic pagans first came to Britain, religion was everywhere, but it wasn't the kind that would dominate later. In fact, it was nothing like it. For early Saxons and Britons alike, the world was brimming with spirits, omens, and divine forces. There were river guardians, seething bees, and trees with protective spirits that needed appeasing. Every aspect of life was touched by the sacred. And those who understood this, those who followed the old ways, were called pagans. In this video, we're going to take a journey back to the Dark Age Britain. We'll explore the pagan beliefs that shaped everyday life, from the most powerful kings to the humblest farmers. Before we get into it, be sure to hit that like button for more videos about the Dark Ages. A pagan farmer, cutting wood, might pause to whisper a prayer to the tree spirit. That's because these early Germanic people weren't just settling in Britain. They were stepping into a world that was deeply entwined with nature. Their religion, a blend of old Germanic traditions and the remnants of Roman and Celtic beliefs, saw spirits in every tree, every stream, and every hill. This wasn't a faith of grand temples, but of ancient groves and sacred springs. It was also a religion deeply intertwined with daily life. A warrior preparing for battle wouldn't just sharpen his sword, he would also find a charm to ward off evil. These amulets, often carved from bone or stone, were thought to bring luck or healing. A farmer tending to his fields would offer thanks to the gods for the sun's warmth and the rain's life-giving water. And if a cow fell ill, it wasn't just poor grazing that was to blame, but possibly an evil spirit or even a curse. This wasn't a gentle faith. These gods were as harsh and unpredictable as the world they inhabited. When the crops failed or a child died, it wasn't a display of divine love, but the capricious whims of a deity. And when they did turn their backs, it was a terrifying thing to behold. To appease these gods, sacrifices were sometimes offered. Animals were the usual suspects, but so were bushels of grain and even human beings. In earlier times, the demand was so great that human sacrifice was required. But by the period, it had largely been replaced by animal offerings. Still, the memory of those sacrificed lingered in festivals like the winter feast of Yule, where the spirit of the sacrificed was honored to ensure a bountiful return of the sun. The land itself was saturated with the divine. Pagan poetry celebrated the beauty of both, the crashing waves and the steadfast cliffs, the whispering trees and the wildflowers. It was a celebration of life in all its forms, a testament to the courage of the hero and a meditation on the brevity of fame. This wasn't a faith for the faint-hearted. These were people living on the edge of the known world, battling not just external enemies, but the darkness that lay within. And as the sun sank lower in the sky and winter tightened its icy grip, they huddled around hearths, sharing stories of bravery and loss, of battles fought and victories won. It was in this world that the legendary tale of Beowulf was born. The hero's journey from Geatland to Hero, the mead hall of King Hrothgar, was a pilgrimage through a landscape imbued with magic. Each monster he battled, from Grendel to his mother, symbolized the darkness that lurked in the shadows, both in the natural world and in the hearts of men. The Anglo-Saxons weren't just chroniclers of their times. They were active participants in a rich tapestry of beliefs and practices. They crafted intricate jewelry, tended to carefully planned farms, and built grand ships to explore distant lands. Yet beneath this vibrant surface, there was always the undercurrent of paganism, a belief system that demanded respect, obedience, and ultimately sacrifice. As the Roman Empire crumbled and Germanic tribes migrated across Europe, they carried with them the echoes of the old gods. And as they settled in new lands, they wove their beliefs into the fabric of daily life. These weren't isolated practices, but a way of seeing the world, a world where the boundary between the sacred and the mundane was thin indeed. For these early Germanic peoples, the world was a dangerous place. There were giants, witches, and evil spirits lurking around every corner. But they also had the old gods, figures from Norse and Germanic mythology whose power rivaled that of the Christian God. The pagans believed that these gods were all-knowing and all-powerful, and they knew that they could be both generous and vengeful. If the pagans followed the old ways and lived according to the old customs, the gods would be on their side. But if they didn't, well, the consequences could be dire. That's why the pagans made offerings to the gods, both big and small. Sometimes it was a matter of life and death. If a ship was about to set sail, for example, the captain might make an offering to the god of the sea to ensure a safe voyage. But it wasn't just fear that motivated the pagans. They also had great respect for the gods. They saw the gods as powerful and majestic, and they wanted to be close to them. That's why they made offerings, not just out of fear, but also out of admiration. In the end, it's important to remember that the pagans weren't a monolithic group. They had different beliefs and practices. But what united them was their reverence for the natural world and their belief in the power of the old gods. By the 6th and 7th centuries, Christianity began creeping back into Britain. Carried by missionaries from Ireland and Rome, St. Augustine arrived in Kent, converting kings and building churches. Monasteries spread, bringing literacy, learning, and most importantly, hope. For ordinary people, the shift wasn't immediate. Paganism and Christianity often mixed. A villager might pray at church on Sunday, but still bury a charm with their child for protection. The new faith promised salvation, but old habits died hard. Monks became the keepers of knowledge. In quiet monasteries, they copied manuscripts by candlelight, preserving not just the Bible, but fragments of Roman history and ancient wisdom. These places also offered food, medicine, and sanctuary rare luxuries in a dangerous world. Christian kings used religion as a tool of power. Converting meant alliances with the wider Christian world, particularly Rome. Suddenly, Britain wasn't just a forgotten island, but part of something bigger. So, when we talk about the Anglo-Saxons today, we usually focus on their brutality and their demise. But what if we considered the beliefs that sustained them through centuries of war and upheaval? What if we followed their path to Christianity, not as conquerors but as converts? What would that have looked like? It's me. Welcome to my channel. And let's find out. You can hear it in the word convert, can't you? The idea of turning something or someone to one side. When the Anglo-Saxons came to Britain in the 5th century, they brought with them a fierce paganism rooted in nature, in the cycles of life and death. Their gods were powerful beings, some with distinctly Roman echoes like Cosidius, a healing god associated with healing and horses. Others seemed more tied to pre-Roman, perhaps Celtic traditions such as the goddess Bad linked to battle and violence. Yet despite these diverse influences, their beliefs were malleable. As the centuries passed, their paganism absorbed elements of Christianity too. It was a syncretic, ever-changing faith. The first stirrings came in the mid-6th century when Irish monks, those intrepid travelers of the early medieval world, landed on the shores of Northumbria. Led by Saint Aidan, they brought with them a different kind of Christianity, one that emphasized personal holiness and an intense connection to nature, a kind of Christianity that some scholars call Celtic or Gaelic. This wasn't the only Christian influence at work, however. By the late 6th century, Augustine had arrived in Kent with a mission from the newly Christianized King of France. Augustine's brand of Christianity, sometimes known as Roman or Latin Christianity, had deep roots in the imperial past. Its rituals were more elaborate, its clergy more hierarchical. These two strains of Christianity, the Celtic and the Roman, each offered a different path to God, the Celtic way, through intense personal piety and a closeness to nature. The Roman way, through grander rituals and a more structured path. But which one took hold? To answer that question, we need to look north to Northumbria. Their royal families vied for power, but religion was the tool they wielded to gain it. King Aethelstan, a contemporary of Augustine, converted to the Roman-style Catholicism favored by Augustine himself. His son, Ethelwulf, sent his children to Rome for their education, an unheard-of move in an age when even nobles rarely left their home regions. Yet after Ethelwulf's death, Northumbria briefly swung back to the Irish-style Christianity of Aidan. This didn't last long. The kingdom soon reverted to Roman Catholicism. And by the end of the 8th century, Christianity of the Roman Rite had become the dominant faith in Northumbria. But this religious landscape wasn't static. Monasteries became vital centers of learning, and many were founded by former royalty, including one by Offa, the king of Mercia, who originally converted to Irish-style Christianity before switching to the Roman style. Some scholars argue that it was precisely this contact between different Christian traditions, along with the influx of missionaries from both Ireland and Rome, that made Northumbrian Christianity so dynamic. This fusion gave rise to a distinctive Northumbrian style of Christianity, which spread to neighboring kingdoms. In the end, the conversion of the Anglo-Saxons was neither sudden nor uniform. The old ways clung on tenaciously, often coexisting alongside Christian practices. Even after a king or a kingdom converted, pagan beliefs and practices continued for decades, sometimes centuries. Take, for instance, the famous Battle of Maldon in the year 991. Here we have one of the very last Anglo-Saxon poems, a record of a battle between the English and the Danes. The poem opens with a prayer to God for victory, but then concludes with a toast to the returning warriors, one that explicitly invokes pagan gods and goddesses. It seems that even in the 10th century, pagan gods and Christian God were not mutually exclusive. In the minds of these men, it was possible to invoke the one and pray to the other. As the Anglo-Saxons moved from paganism to Christianity, they didn't abandon all of their old beliefs and practices, but wove them into a new cultural fabric, one that was uniquely theirs. It was a long process, played out over many generations and fraught with internal division. But ultimately, it was a process that gave birth to a new people. If you liked this episode, check out our series on the origins of Islam. Thank you so much for watching. Ever wonder what life was really like for the average person way back when? Forget the epic sagas and royal courts for a moment. Let's step into the muddy boots of the common folk, the peasants and farmers who made up the vast majority of the population. In one word, their life was hard. Incredibly hard. Imagine your alarm clock isn't an app, but the first sliver of dawn painting the sky. You don't hit snooze? You get up because the animals need feeding, the well needs visiting for water, and that fence the goats knocked over yesterday isn't going to fix itself. The day began at sunrise and ended at sunset, a relentless cycle of chores dictated by the seasons. For the women of the household, the work was just as grueling. They were the masters of the home, but this wasn't a corner office. This was backbreaking labor. They'd spend hours grinding grain into flour by hand, kneading dough and baking bread over an open fire. They spun raw wool into thread, wove it into cloth, and then painstakingly sewed it into clothing for the entire family. And let's not forget brewing the ale, which was often safer to drink than the water. It was a full-time, sunrise to sundown job every single day. Meanwhile, the men were out in the fields. From dawn till dusk, they were plowing with oxen, sowing seeds, and harvesting crops with nothing but hand tools. When they weren't farming, they were hunting to supplement the family's diet, chopping wood for the fire, or repairing the tools that were their lifeline. This was a world without machinery, where every single task was powered by pure muscle. And the kids? Don't picture them playing video games. Children were a vital part of the workforce from a very young age. Little hands were perfect for tasks like herding goats, scaring birds away from the crops, or helping to grind grain. They learned the skills they'd need to survive by doing, not by sitting in a classroom. Their childhood was short and responsibility came early. Let's talk fashion, forget fast fashion. This was slow fashion in the extreme. Most clothing was made of wool. It was scratchy, heavy, and probably smelled a bit like sheep, especially when wet. Colors came from whatever you could find in nature, berries, roots, and plants, resulting in earthy tones of brown, green, and yellow, and shoes. They were a luxury. Simple leather turnshoes were for those who could afford them. Most people, for most of their lives, simply went barefoot, their feet toughened and calloused by the rough earth. Now, let's step inside a typical home. It wasn't a cozy cottage. It was often a single, long room with a dirt floor and a thatched roof. In the center, a fire would smolder on an open hearth. With no chimney, the smoke would just hang in the air, stinging your eyes and coating everything with a layer of soot. And you weren't alone. To survive the brutal winters, families would often bring their livestock inside with them for shared warmth. Imagine sleeping just a few feet away from a cow or a couple of sheep. It was crowded, smoky, and definitely not quiet. So, where was the fun? It wasn't about extravagant parties. Entertainment was simple and communal. After a long day's work, families would gather around the fire. They'd tell stories passed down through generations, challenge each other with riddles, or listen to the haunting melodies of a simple harp or lyre. On rare feast days or holidays, the whole community would come together. The local hall would finally fill with laughter. Music would play, beer would flow freely, and for a brief moment, the hardships were forgotten. But those hardships were never far away. Famine was a constant threat. One bad harvest could mean starvation for the entire village. Disease could sweep through a community with devastating speed, with no modern medicine to stop it. And then there was the ever-present danger of raids from outsiders. Life was fragile, and life expectancy was shockingly short, perhaps only 30 to 40 years if you were lucky. Reaching what we consider middle age was a true achievement, and the elderly were deeply respected for their wisdom and survival. Yet, and this is the most remarkable part, it wasn't all misery. Even in this constant struggle, people found joy. They found it in the bonds of family, sharing a simple meal together. They found it in the songs they sang while they worked. They found it in their faith, whether pagan or Christian, which gave them a framework to understand their world and find meaning in their short, difficult lives. They loved, they laughed, they built communities, and they endured. They were the foundation of the world we know today, and their resilience is a story worth remembering. Thanks so much for watching and exploring this piece of history with us. If you found this journey into the past interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into how people really lived. We'll see you in the next one. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. When you hear the words Dark Ages, what comes to mind? Probably a bleak, empty chapter of history, right? A long, miserable pause between the fall of Rome and the rise of the great medieval kingdoms. Well, today we're going to challenge that idea. We're going to look at how this supposedly dark period was unavoided at all, but the very crucible in which the Britain we know today was forged. After the Roman legions packed up and left, Britain was plunged into a period of intense upheaval. Waves of Angles, Saxons, and Jutes arrived, not just as raiders but as settlers. It was a time of conflict, yes, but out of that chaos something new began to grow. Small, competing kingdoms started to emerge from the wreckage of Roman Britain kingdoms like Wessex, Mercia, and Northumbria. These were the very building blocks that would one day be unified into the nation of England. But the changes weren't just political. Imagine the linguistic melting pot. The Latin of the Romans, the Celtic tongues of the native Britons, and the Germanic dialects of the newcomers all swirled together. This incredible mix gave birth to something entirely new. Old English. This is the language of heroes and monsters, the language of the epic poem Beowulf. It's the ancient root of the very words I am speaking and you rehearing right now. Every time you say hello, water, or father, you're speaking a language that was born in the fires of the so-called Dark Ages. This era also gave us a rich and powerful culture. It was a world of warrior codes where loyalty to your lord was the highest virtue. It was a time of breathtaking artistry, from the intricate metalwork of the Sutton Hoo treasure to the stunning illuminated manuscripts like the Lindisfarne Gospels. These weren't the products of a culture in decline. They were the confident expressions of a vibrant new civilization finding its voice. And what about everyday life? It's fascinating how pagan traditions didn't just disappear with the arrival of Christianity. They blended. Think about it. The ancient winter solstice festival of Yule, with its feasting and evergreen decorations, was seamlessly absorbed into Christmas. Old harvest celebrations found new life as church feasts. This wasn't an erasure of the past, but a conversation with it, a blending of old and new that created traditions that still echo in our modern holidays. Life was undoubtedly hard. It was often brutal, short, and filled with uncertainty, but it was also profoundly human. People fell in love, raised families, told stories around the fire, prayed for good harvests, and mourned their dead, just as we do. They weren't just passively surviving. They were actively building a future. Out of the ruins and the hardship, they laid the foundations for a culture that would endure for over 1,000 years. So, while Dark Age Britain might sound grim, it was, in reality, an age of incredible resilience and creation. The real story isn't just about kings and battles, but about the ordinary, nameless villagers who carried on. They planted seeds, both literally in the fields and figuratively in their culture, that would one day grow into a kingdom and shape the world. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this journey back in time as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments what part of this era you find most interesting. See you in the next one.